Good afternoon, everyone. I am Nikhita Nadkarni. I represent Acumen. In terms of the structure of the panel today, or the roundtable today, so I'll do a quick case study presentation, not case study really, but just Shruti will talk a little bit about why as a that we try and use practical case studies, examples from different perspectives, across debt, across early stage financing, across gender investments, and also a couple of frameworks from CPI as well as from ICRA. So that's the sort of structure today. Awesome. So a little bit about Acumen very quickly. We're a pioneer in the patient capital approach. We've been investing since 2001. And so globally we have over $150 million of investments across 110 enterprises. In India, we've invested about quarter of that amount to support, I think, 40 plus enterprises. And overall, the impact of our portfolio is about 500 million lives. In terms of what you see here is a very simplistic approach of our overall kind of theory of change. So as Acumen, we use capital to invest in companies. We leverage our networks and knowledge. We leverage our networks and knowledge to invest in companies and to accompany them so that they're able to create access to essential markets and to products and services, to build resilience of the communities with whom they work, and finally to correct any kind of structural inequities so that we're able to improve the lives of the poor. What we're really good at is tracking the impact of our investments on the poor. So what you see here is three basic pillars of our overall community level impact. To put this into context, for one of our investments in as Technologies, which is a solar dehydration technology, and they've taken a value chain approach to really work with the community on the ground. What we're interested in knowing is how many people are they able to impact below that $3.2 value amount. In terms of breadth of impact, we want to know how many farmers they're working with, how many jobs they're able to create, both direct jobs as well as indirect jobs, how many women they're actually working with. And when it comes to depth of impact, we try and capture the quality of change. So what is the change that they're able to bring about at the household level? And to do so, we've been using the lean data approach, which essentially means listening to the community, capturing their voice really. So who best to go to rather than the people that actually get impacted directly, and that's when we've been using the lean data study approach, which is now before it kind of got into 60, and some of you may have been aware of the impact management that they do. Yeah, so I think just coming to really why really measure impact, right? Like basics. It's not really just about communicating, it's not just about reporting, but it's really to take action. So we know that impact looks different at a sector level, at an enterprise level, and at an individual level. Therefore, it's important that we measure, so that we identify what we need to measure, and then take action based on that, right? So what's important is there's a cost consideration, there's a stakeholder consideration, and of course we want to be able to use that learning and that insight to be able to improve our investment strategy, to be able to improve our overall portfolio management. Yeah, so interlinking the climate angle, and really that's the focus of our presentation here today. I think really acknowledging that solving, what we know is we're able to solve the problems of poverty through the investments that we do, but we're not the best when it comes to integrating the climate angle, and that's something that we're learning as we go. I mean, there are a number of frameworks out there, there are so many different things that you can do, but what we've done here at Acumen is to look at through all of the work that we do across the three different initiatives that we have. So maybe just to set a bit of context, we invest in three areas. is sustainable agriculture. So we're looking at, the climate resilience of the farmers. We're looking at sectors of productive use of energy. So how are we able to mitigate, so it's essentially from a mitigation angle, but also from an adaptation angle, really. How are you able to adapt to the effects of climate change? And finally, we're looking at, from a green jobs perspective, really, how are we able to improve the lives and improve the quality of work when it comes to informal workers. So what we've done is we've been intentional about incorporating the climate strategy as part of the work that we do. We look at mitigation and adaptation in a couple of different ways, kind of directly linked to the work that we do. So for example, the same S4S example that we've taken, these clean energy solutions help reduce the overall overall carbon emissions. So S4S, for example, reports on mitigation on account of using solar dryers in comparison to diesel or other fossil fuel based dryers. They're also able to report on the reduced food wastage that they're able to, the amount of food wastage that gets reduced because of the model, and also the reduced logistics cost of the model because it's near farm gate that they're able to really process. So those are the three levels in which they've done an entire life cycle analysis, and that's really the way they're able to report. But what we do realize is that not all companies, and especially early stage companies, are able to really do their entire life cycle analysis, and there's no common way to really measure and report on mitigation, and which is why we're also working with organizations like Gogla to really look at slightly more standardized frameworks to track, to work with the calculators that they've developed to look at how we can report on the mitigation numbers. When it comes to adaptation, that's where it really gets tricky. One of the approaches or one of the thought processes that we have is that improvement in incomes is able to hopefully improve the resilience to climate shocks, and there are enough and more studies that really show that how economic resilience actually leads to climate resilience. But having said that, it's an imperfect calculation, and what we're trying to do is, as part of our agriculture work actually, we've tried to develop a resilience framework where we're talking about how, there are actually questions that we've laid out and indicators that we've laid out, or we've tried to lay out, where we're talking about how are we able to really track and measure how communities are able to absorb shocks, adapt to shocks, as well as what is their ability to transform from the current situation to a more long-term approach. So those are the different methodologies, those are the different parameters that we've tried to incorporate. Finally, I think just three major learnings along the way. One is impact looks different at different levels. So being able to really talk about what impact means at a household level, at an enterprise level, at a market level, as well as at a planet level. And what you see on the right is essentially a sort of an example of what we've tried to do in our energy initiative, which is the productive, the pioneer fund that we have for our energy investments. So that's the first major learning, I would say. The second learning is to know that there is no one size fits all. It's really important to note who the stakeholder is, what budget you have, what kind of impact do you want to track, what kind of data do you want to be able to track, because you can get data on a million things, but really what's relevant to you as an organization, to your stakeholders, and to the companies that you're working with. So to be able to really have that clarity right in the beginning is critical. And also based on the startup capacity, because capacities are varied, whether it's an early stage company or a late stage company, depending upon the different kind of the models itself. So definitely to know that there's no one size fits all. And the third, I think, most critical learning has been that you can't be incorporating a climate angle at that later stage. It's right in the beginning. So right from your theory of change to really seeing what are some of the climate metrics that you want to incorporate, incorporating that throughout your due diligence and your investing process, and throughout your overall portfolio management process. So how can you really help the companies better manage their environment risks? So for that matter, how can they better improve? So is there some sort of technical assistance that you can provide over there? And finally, what are we learning? So insight creation is also an important way to really capture our learnings, but also disseminate and do a large amount of knowledge sharing to really see how we can broad base some of this. So just, I think, 3 learnings I would say. Thank you.
I have a quick show of hands question. How many in the room here touched mud in the last 1 month? Mud, soil. How many in the room here like handlooms? Great. How many in the room here really find the jobs that you have meaningful? Yes, nobody wants to get fired. Great, thank you. But so the session here is to keep things real and to really bring back the conversation about what's happening, what's possible, what's not. And it is here that I would like that I want to bring your focus on how we are doing things at Upaya. And I am really taking it a step forward here with the title, because when assessing climate is not your core impact metric, and that's the job I have at Upaya. I lead impact measurement at Upaya Social Ventures. And I'll quickly go through this case study as to how we have worked and what are we doing in the space of measuring climate action at our end. So, Upaya Social Ventures, we are an early stage investor. We invest with a focus on creating dignified quality jobs for the poor. We fight poverty through business. Our thesis is that entrepreneurship and enterprises build the opportunity for people living in poverty, A, and B, creating good quality jobs, which means fair income, predictable income, skill development, support and resilience at work is something that would make these jobs sustainable enough for people to fight adversity, and good jobs are really related to long-term business success. It is not a byproduct impact of an enterprise. With that thesis, we invest as equity. We go up to $50,000 as pre-seed seed capital. And our portfolio is mostly, so that's exactly what I said. Our portfolio is around food, agriculture, circular economy, arts and crafts. We went with a sector agnostic approach in the industry, where we said wherever we find business models which are intersecting with poverty and creating jobs is where we will invest. And we gravitated towards these sectors on waste management, food and agriculture, skills, rural manufacturing, and that's where we are. But we wanted to know whether we are making the right bets, are we taking the right bets both financially and on impact? And how do we measure impact then? So the metric that we follow on measurement is income increase. Our portfolio is making 90% income increase for job holders. And how do we assess it? With every investment we make, we do baseline survey on our own for with a 10% job holder base of those investee companies. We have a third party partner, we spend our own capital, 10% of our operating budget to do these surveys. And that's the data which is also available on our dashboards. Job holders learn new skills, 47% job holders are saving regularly, 34% job holders were previously unemployed. So that's kind of the portfolio impact that we practice. But last year, we took a conscious pause and said, we realized that there is an impact of climate change on our portfolio, on our job holders, because the climate change is affecting the working conditions of the job holders. People in waste management industry, people in agriculture, allied sectors, artisans not getting silk supply because the cocoon got really, lost. So there's no income increase because nobody really worked on it. How do we look at it? And those are the risks to our portfolio on an investment. It was an investment risk. And on an upside, ILO is estimating 25 million new jobs to be created in renewable energy by 2030. So we should be looking at that industry. And 78 million new jobs globally to be created in the transition to circular economy. So those are also some of the new areas that we wanted to look at. So we set up the priority for our business strategic plan, saying we'll look at gender, one, but we'll also screen out any company with a negative impact on the environment. and we will seek those which have a meaningful mitigation and adaptation strategy. So this is the mandate I got from the board, and it was easier said than done, because how do I now measure negative impact? The moment I wake up in the morning, I'm sure I'm making a negative impact on the environment, some way or the other. So we started going down that route. But we said, with the pipeline, it is difficult. Let's look inward first. What is our portfolio company doing? So we looked at 36 investments, 24 active investments right now, till date in 12 years. And we mapped it on the ABC framework, which is, how is your portfolio avoiding harm, benefiting environment, contributing to solution. And we just looked at that broad-based framework, and we found, like you see in the left, the entire India is under climate risk. So basically all our portfolios are under climate risk. But with that worrisome map, we figured that 13 out of 24 companies are acting to avoid harm with climate adaptation strategies. One company is benefiting the stakeholders, their AgTech solutions with provision for climate adaptation, and 10 out of 24 companies are contributing to solution through mitigation strategies such as agri-ship practices, waste management, EV and improved materials. So this gave us a bird's eye view as to how the portfolio is doing on climate per se. And then we adopted, for our practical purposes, a set of questions to be administered at the pipeline due diligence stage. So we have a set of questions on measuring quality of jobs. We have questions on gender, but this is what we added to our list, and we designed the process with the investment team, because oftentimes it's a clash between investment and impact teams, and we designed it collaboratively so that there's enough buy-in. And we also have a scoring tool, pipeline scoring tool, which we have adapted from the CDC UK, which is now the BII, and we have added extra credit points for companies that demonstrate contribution to climate solutions. So it gives them an extra point to when we are evaluating them in pipeline. This is an example of, say, waste management, some questions that we have added to the pipeline. But we started administering them in the latest pipeline assessment, like waste diverted from landfills, kilowatts of renewable energy, amount of greenhouse gas, your emissions mitigated, percentage of waste collected, recycled, etc. So we added these questions based on our current understanding, looking at a few frameworks based from Climate Collaborative, CPI and others. But what did we learn? We went to the early stage, and like I mentioned, we go to seed, pre-seed companies. The data availability is an issue. We don't get enough data. However, there's a lot of keenness from the companies to learn what information can we give you, how do we collect it, can you help us collect it, can you tell us which metrics to really follow, but in a lean way. As an investor, we know collaborating is the way forward. We don't want to reinvent the wheel here. We are looking at metrics like Climate Collective, XDI, ANDI, etc., CPI, and we are keen to learn metrics that need to connect to our core metric of job quality. So we can't go all out looking at 1,000 indicators there, but which are the metrics which are talking to our portfolio management? And that there's a cost to collect this data, there's a cost to manage this data and report this data. And so these are a few learnings that we have had. But with that, I would like to open the floor here for discussions with our esteemed speakers. Nikhita, on to you.
Thank you so much, Shruti. With that, I thought we could go to Soumya. You represent C40 Partners, and you're also another investor, equity investor in the sector, investing across a range of climate-focused subsectors, I would say. And you've also launched a livelihood fund recently. So, if you could just talk a little bit about your experience, how have you integrated some of the climate frameworks? What have been some of the learnings, challenges, and also if you could use maybe a practical case study.
Firstly, thank you for having me here. So we are a gender smart ESG fund. We do investments in sector agnostic, like it could be agriculture, it could be skilling education, waste management, clean energy. When it comes to impact measurement, our KPIs are very curated, comprehensive. When I say curated, it's curated to the business model. and the sector that we are investing in. And it's not just limited to that, it's also curated to the place where we are investing in. What do I mean by place-based is the impact what is for a company based in South India cannot be the same impact for a company based in Northeast, right? So I can give example in the later part. When it comes to impact measurement, we collect quantitative and qualitative data from the companies that we have invested in. For example, Sahas Waste Management, where we are also one of the investors. There we do collect impact, social impact metrics, and also climate-based metrics. For example, percentage of waste collected, percentage of waste that is reaching to the landfill, and the percentage of recycling rates. So this would be related to climate. And when it comes to social impact, what do we collect in Sahas is percentage of job created in that month, and what is the salary or the wages being paid to the employees. Because when it comes to waste management, it is notorious to exploit women. They are paid very less. But here in Sahas, they pay more than the state-based salaries that is stated by the state government. So this is something that we have seen in Sahas Waste Management. And another example I can speak about is clean energy, where we have invested in Freer Energy Services based out of Hyderabad. So this company, of course, like providing full-fledged solar solutions to the residential customers and to the corporate customers. Here, the metrics we collect is percentage of reduction in CO2 emission, percentage of adoption to the clean energy. And when it comes to social impact in Freer Energy, what we have seen is earlier when we invested, there were no women employees in the company because it's highly dominated by male, the solar industry. So what we insisted the company is like, why don't you take an initiative and have more women in your sales and marketing team. And currently 50% of their marketing and sales team is women. So these are the sort of changes we want to bring across the sectors that we are investing in. And when it comes to impact, we feel gender cuts across all the sectors, including climate. So this is what we are trying to do, we have done in Fund 1. And taking the learnings from the Fund 1, we have launched our Fund 2, where we will be implementing all these learnings. And we are building a climate toolkit to assess our future companies with respect to how they are contributing towards the climate positive, climate neutral. And if a company is climate negative, how can they move towards being neutral or positive? So this is something we are trying to do.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Soumya. So coming to Suresh, I mean, YSB has been providing debt capital for years now and fighting poverty through the same thesis with business and enterprise creation. How do you see climate change measurement in this way of your investing, where the tenure of investment may be lesser than, say, in equity? Does it change? How are you tackling it?
Thanks. Yes, YSB was started in 2017. I think, yes, we started off as a jet provider and not equity. But we do tackle it in a couple of ways. It's not short term. Many of our debt is pretty long term. Late for about 7 years, 6 years, 5 years. But sometimes most of the enterprises, the way they want debt, we can structure it as short as 15 days to as long as 7, 10 years. So we are kind of agnostic. But having said that, but yes, on average, I think we will be, we are more shorter than because of the way debt itself functions. Because debt does not, most of them actually start repaying the debt over the tenure of the period which the exposure is there. Many times, what happens is by, if we give even 5 years, then by 2.5 years, half month, right? So hence, that works yes, it has its own challenges in the way because debt actually operates. As long as the companies have cash flows to service, they'll be able to do it. In terms of measurement of impact, most of the companies, I think, I'm not going to repeat all the things what you said. I think all three of them have already said the way, what indicators, matrices we can use for doing it. I'll try to probably give a perspective of, as an entrepreneur, lender, but earlier I used to borrow money. So one of the issues which I always had was in the impact space, the biggest challenge which I find when an impact investor comes or an provider whoever it is, they ask for the best of everything. They want everything to be done by the enterprise. That is where we find as any impact businesses in climate change or poverty or anything, they'll find it difficult to do and comply with all the things what the world wants. I think the world wants more than one. If you look at in commercial businesses, most of the time, there's only one indicator. Hey, we don't ask for another thing. How is your bottom line? Are we sustainable? Are we making enough profits? And how are you manage your risks to ensure there is sustained profitability in the company? That's one matrix, and the companies are good. If we comply with that, rest of the things is generally, as long as you also make sure all the compliances are boxed in. That's also fun. But when it comes to impact businesses, I think the challenge is for them, they not only have to make sure all those financial matrices are boxed in, at the same time, they need to go walk under the extra miles to actually show that they're also making impact. That's where the challenge will come. So these were things which we have all recognized and thought about, and we said what we will measure and what we will not measure in our portfolio companies. Because I was in the receiving end, I used to do a lot of reporting and all these things. So I felt it was too burdensome. To be sustainable and also do so much of impact measurements will become very expensive. So the best way what we thought we will do is we will get to or get those indicators which is easier and which they naturally collect in their work what they do. Some of the indicators with Shruti and Nikhita mentioned in their listing. Just simple things, whether how are they measuring the jobs data? Let me take one step back and put it. See, we follow the three principles. That is, three zeros is what we actually look at. One is zero poverty, zero unemployment, and zero net carbon emissions. So we try to measure what is collectible by the enterprise on these three matrices. Some of the indicators were actually presented earlier. So what we want to ensure in that is how sustained are their numbers. When we talk about poverty, basically you can look at income enhancement as one of the measurement metrics. Then is it a sustained number, or is it it just goes up and comes down, or what is the consistency of those income? Because many a times in some of the areas which we all work, we all work in waste management. So all of us have worked with similar companies. We do know that issue with most companies which we are all operating is they are not taking the full responsibility of the full income of many of their people who are working. I'm not talking about employees, the beneficiaries. Few of them do full time, otherwise many of them give part of their income. So maybe good because that is, as long as that is sustainable, that is sustained income, it is also good. So probably just instead of measuring increase in the incomes, if we can actually look at sustained increase in the income, that means how long those incomes are sustainable. Whether it is going to happen for 3 months, 6 months, or just 1 year, and the company goes away and the income goes away. So what is that we go through? So what is the impact of each of our companies where they can ensure that there is sustained income? Similarly, it is sustained jobs also. How are the jobs created, which we also mentioned earlier. But how sustained they are? Are they just there for a short period of time, or will they go? Because many companies, if you look at one of the things which happens with jobs is most companies come in or also have the pressure of efficiencies. Efficiencies is a villain for jobs. Right? Jobs goes away the moment you talk about efficiencies in the company, because the only way for companies to be efficient is to kill jobs. we need to look at whether these companies are ensuring there are creating jobs and how sustain them. So probably that is what we also try to look at. And of course, and the emissions avoided or waste, avoided waste, like this Suresh talked about. So there are enough indicators for us to actually measure. I think I'm sure all of us sitting in this room know what are the indicators we can actually look at. But what we look at is how sustained these numbers are. Are the numbers just good for us to report in one annual report, or can we report the same numbers for next 10, 20 years in our annual reports? This is what we would like to actually look at. It's not easy, as I said. It is tough because there is always a pressure on all these enterprises, whether they are looking at their bottom lines or they're looking at impact. If they tilt towards impact, the bottom lines will get affected, and all of us sitting in this room might not support that. So if they look at only financial profitability, then again we have the other side. So it's a delicate tightrope walk which these social enterprises have. Yeah, that's what we try to work with them and see how they can actually make this tightrope walk. Because when I used to run a microfinance, and that was one of our biggest challenges which we always had. How do we balance between the financial and social / environmental goals or objectives we have? So that's what we try to measure. So as long as anybody who is there, so we do two things in practical terms. One is whatever that company is measuring or collecting data in their normal course of business. Nothing more than that. We should not ask anything more. Don't ask more than that. If we want more or the world wants to know more, I think they need to hire more professional impact measurement people, and then probably Sacramento probably can do. Or there are a lot of other people in the room also. They can actually invest and actually look at measurement. I think if we use those kind of proxy simple indicators, then the social businesses or the impact businesses can actually do justice. We ask for more. They will do for a few days and then they'll stop, and then we are in a fix. Like Nikhita said, it's difficult to get those data. So simplest is the best. So that's what we try to do. And so if you want anything more in depth, we actually do that at our cost. I think more time and resources and more qualified people to do that.
Thanks Suresh for that very detailed description of how we all from the investment side feel. So I'll go now to CPI, to Neha. That you've heard our rant now, I think. Yeah, enough that data availability and capacity, and resources and money, skills. So now from a CPI perspective, you're really doing the ecosystem building on climate reporting, which may be different from impact. But so what are you seeing the demand from, say, the enterprises you are interacting with, or what is your reflection on how climate-related data is being reported on?
Thanks, Shruti, for the question. So, taking a step back, you mentioned something in your presentation that your board demanded that you would include climate. Treat that climate was into consideration. You pick up any group of investors, impact, equity, debt, any, unless it's asked for from the top, it isn't a consideration even today in 8 out of 10 cases, right? If it isn't a consideration in 8 out of 10 cases, it means it's not a streamlined indicator that's ever going to get collected voluntarily. Part 1. So I completely agree. If you're efficient, you're cutting out dumb jobs, and if you're keeping jobs, you're inefficient. To a large extent, most industries will have that. If you're managing your climate risks, you're not lending green, and if you're lending green, you're not managing your climate risks directly. It's a lot of effort. Which means that investments, typically even today, barring large-scale RE, climate is still not considered a good investment bet. That's part 2. Third, we love frameworks. I come from a credit scoring background, so I also love them. I know you need to measure risk to manage it, and completely buy that. Yesterday somebody pointed out and even I wasn't aware that there are over 1,000 ESG frameworks. There is not enough collective capacity in this room and the ballroom together to deal with 1,000 frameworks. So is data a problem? Yes. Will it continue to be a problem? 100% yes, because our mindset is not changing. We're not going out actively and saying that climate is the base. And so I'm going to take something that you said and flip it around a little bit. You said gender is the base for everything. I would say climate is the base for everything, because climate is going to impact gender, it's going to impact healthcare, it's going to impact education. You're already seeing it. You put up some fantastic numbers from ILO on the job creation. Slightly disturbing numbers from ILO. The heat wave alone is going to cause a 1/4 reduction in the workforce. No amount of job creation is going to bring back the laborers because they're unable to tolerate heat. And India on top of that is a bigger problem because we are a tropical country. So somebody said recently, we're all talking about pollution taking away years from our life. The combination of heat and humidity is going to kill us first before even the pollution gets to us. Now, all of that aside, the good news is we do see progress in data. We do see progress in these conversations. We do see progress in requests for capacity building, for more education, for more information to be out there. We run 2 facilities, which are technical assistance facilities. And we have Devan sitting here, and he's been working very hard with the smaller businesses, because when they come to us, they're not in a position to actually be able to create a proposal which anybody in this room will be wanting to fund. I'm being very upfront about it, and it's not that it's the funder's problem. Everyone has certain requirements that they need met. You also have small businesses who do not have the capability because they are either trying to get their business up and running and scaling it, or second, it's just not their area of focus. Expecting an MSME or a new startup or anyone to understand scope 1, scope 2 is a tall order. When a lot of people who are in this space have a hard time saying, okay, yes, this is scope 1, scope 2. So the need for data, the need for capacity building is very paramount. I think if investment could come with a lens of saying that we want to support not only in the business growth, but also in the knowledge growth. And I understand that that's not going to be traditional investment, but I think the role of impact capital and philanthropy capital here becomes paramount. Second, when you're doing data baselining, and I think some put it very well, what they have, take that. But that also means that at some level, climate needs to become the bigger focus. When everyone starts asking for those 4 common parameters, every business in the next 5 years will learn how to report it. Every business learned how to report, how to make a balance sheet, a P&L, and a cash flow statement. Most of the technical people don't know this, but they learn because they know that that's what's needed. So can businesses, can investment drive that? Yes. Is it driving it today? Maybe not. Now, a third perspective on this, on the framework bit. Mitigation is an easier thing to capture in a framework because GHG emissions. The more you talk on adaptation, the one thing that comes out clearly every single time, that unlike mitigation, which has a box that you can put it in, adaptation is not something that you can do a one-stop solution. It does not work. When you talk to the experts who are actually doing the work, it is complicated. And more complicated because adaptation is not going to be funded primarily by private investment. But I still think impact investment, waste, agriculture, there is scope there. But there you will have to possibly look at sector and geography experts who can say, okay, this project in this area, yes, makes sense, but the same project in another area is bad news. So, 3 points. Capacity building, very much important. Data is improving, but will only be mainstream the minute we mainstream climate, which we're still averse to, frankly, because it doesn't make money. And the third is, let's not try to straight jacket things. make them a little bit more adaptable.
Thank you, Neha, and thanks for also summarizing that for us, right? Seema, I just want to come to you. Taking a cue from a little bit of what Neha said, climate is sort of that lens, I would say, or that horizontal that runs across the different, work that we do across gender, across health, across all of the different sectors. And you are a gender-focused investor. Just want to understand from you, what are some of the indicators that you track at that sort of climate and gender nexus? And if there are any portfolio companies or just from your practical experience, like what are some of those frameworks that are critical to you?
Yeah, so everybody, we should probably do a stretch, so make sure everybody is awake. But I think this conversation, and Neha, you really energized my thought process here, and thank you for saying that. But in my true role of being a provocateur, I'm actually going to disagree with you, and I'll tell you why. The reality is that the burden of climate change is not gender neutral. And the reality is that they're 14 times more likely that women and children will suffer the consequences of climate change. And 14 times, with any metric of math, is a huge number than men will. So when you look at that, and you look at an environment where there's, an estimated $3.2 trillion shortage in addressing all the SDGs, our approach to investing is, what is that little one first domino that will knock out all the other 16 dominoes? And that domino is not climate, it is gender. Why? Because a mother has a multi-generational impact and she controls a community. And for some of, I date myself, there's an old American movie, it's not that old, but it's called When Harry Met Sally. And I call it the When Harry Met Sally effect. And it's an inappropriate reference, but it's a very relevant reference. Nothing motivates a woman to change her life and her family's life and her community's life than seeing another woman succeed. And I say this with all fondness, and I'm a woman, so I can get away by saying this. The reality is, if you want to change communities to change their behavior and adopt climate, a lot of that push comes in from usually the mother, the wife, the daughter in their roles, in their daily lives. So the way we look at all of this is to say it's actually gender that is cross-cutting and gender that is actually the horizontal base on which we can have the sustainable domino effect. Because when you have gender equity, and we're not even chasing gender equality by the way, we're chasing gender equity, which is a whole different paradigm. We're saying you're addressing in a very significant way all the other 16 SDGs. So I want that to be put out there first. And yes, everything that has been said, so I'm not going to repeat any more information. We track the same KPIs, we track everything is contextualized based on the sector, the industry, etc. Big fan, and Suresh, what you said about making it simple. Keep it simple, the KISS principle, keep it simple. The last S is not to be very complimentary, but we believe in keeping things simple and most importantly, measure it across time. So with that initial comments, we've actually, because we're so focused on gender, we've actually developed our own gender equity scorecard. We call it the GEC score. We say it's a gender equity citizenship scorecard. GEC score, and we'd actually love for partnership with ICRA and the other rating agencies. In fact, we'd love to open source it, because what we've realized is measurement is great, and most of the measurements come in really, really poor. But it's in the act of discovery that how bad is your score. There are a lot of policy initiatives that come out. For example, and we do measure 32 dimensions in our GEC score. Most of them are not measurable. But then it builds the intentionality of saying, hey, why aren't you looking at this? Why aren't you looking at that as solutions? That then is a precursor to many policy recommendations. It is also a roadmap to the company itself of saying where are the gaps and where you can improve. And we'd love for that to be adopted on a broader scale. The other thing we're doing differently is linking to your point about efficiency. For us, it's not a dichotomy. We actually say by taking, and it's intuitive, by taking 50% of the population with you, you will actually improve your ROI. And we try to say that by saying measure. So, yeah, the argument you make, we've actually studied that in the context of manufacturing, for example. The biggest concern there was, and I studied that in the context of manufacturing in US. Everybody was raving about, oh, China and India are taking jobs. And we said, no, the biggest job loss was because of automation. Because the productivity, the emphasis on productivity increase was to let's find ways to automate. And then there's a whole discussion about AI, so we won't even get into that. The issue is, people get motivated to not only change behaviors, but to even start tracking their behaviors and measurement when there is any dimension of a return that is offered to them. So what we're trying to do is say, you track your GEC score, you track your KPIs of carbon emission, greenhouse gas emissions reduced, and we give them a simple metrics of saying, here are the 5, 10 that you should track. Now let's see whether your profitability is improved. When they start seeing, quarter over quarter, year over year, improvements in their returns, that's when they get totally invested in saying, I will change my behavior because I'm seeing the return. And nothing motivates a person than seeing more returns come in. So I'm not saying it has, and then the other mindset that we adopt is, look, there are 1,001 problems in the world. We can't solve for each one of them, but one is better than zero. So to say that you could not create X million jobs, but you came short and you came, so our goal is helping 30 million women gain agency by 2030. If I end up at 28 million, will we beat ourselves too hard? I don't think so. We'll be fine, right? So that's the approach we bring to our investments also, saying yes, you should, and we set for them a goal. So we set a goal for them. Goals work in our world. We said, you're at level X of your greenhouse gas emissions, try to get to X minus 20%. Here's your goal by 2030. And try to be on a path to net zero by 2050, which by the way coincides with the Paris Agreement. So we're trying to gently nudge them and guide them to a goal setting which gets them to a direction, and the measurement piece becomes just a check of saying, are the guardrails in to be able to get them to that end goal? Because the measurement and the KPIs are not the end goal itself. They're just checkpoints and saying, are you on the right road? So I could go on, but I'll pause there.
Thanks, Seema. And that was really a good summary for all of us. But I'll now come to Shamsher, and this is, you're seeing the other side of the spectrum, Shamsher. With ICRA, you work with large corporates looking at benchmarking and their data on corporate reporting. And a lot of companies we all work with want to be there in that situation after years. They want to be the large corporates, or they want to be the supply chains of the large corporates that you are working with. So what is your advice, and this is the final piece and the highlight of the session, to the companies we work with, that which are those metrics that they can start embedding now to be compliant and to be able to speak to these global frameworks that your company works with?
Sure. No, first of all, I think thank you for having me on this panel. I think Seema talked about gender equality and all. I think it's good to know, and glad to know rather, that women on this panel are in majority. So you tick the right box there. Right? So I'll give you an example of, again, speaking on gender equality before I come to your point directly. We did one of the electric two-wheeler manufacturers in India. I won't name them right now, but as I speak, you'll perhaps be able to figure out the name. They've set up a very large factory 100 kilometers south of Bangalore, and I happen to have visited their factory a couple of times in the last 2 years. What they've done is that, except for few people, except for the manufacturing head and few people at the security level, everybody else is women. The entire workforce is women. And I was interacting over lunch with the plant head and I asked him, how is it going for you? Are you able to manage it well and all that? He said, you won't believe, Shamsher, it's working so well. First of all, we don't have any union-related issues at the plant. And more importantly, most of the women who work at that plant come from the communities, the villages around that location. And initially, it was a struggle to hire them because we had to convince their families that they can work at our plant safely. We pick them up in the morning in our buses and we drop them back at night. We have securities on the bus. But now they love us so much that they want us to expand our operation very quickly because women are working and they are in the 17 to 20 years age bracket where otherwise they would have been pushed into a marriage. Now they're working, they're not just supporting their families, but they're also supporting the younger siblings who go to school and pay for it. So I was so pleased with that instance recently that really I think some of these aspirations and the goals that the new startup field is bringing is working really well. And now we see many of the conventional businesses, the traditional business houses are also actually trying to follow that. So I think this is one of the examples which I really always talk about, which is making a different level of impact at the community level, but by a large, investor or a corporate in that sense. To come to your point, I think, what we see with companies at ICA, we rate companies across the board. We rate companies which have, turnover going into lakhs of crores to as low as 50 crores. Data is always an issue, as Neha pointed out, and you also pointed out with the smaller entities. But we also try to differentiate our analysis by looking at alternate data sets. A lot of the information is now made available for the public domain. For instance, GST collections data. Very importantly, I think the EPF filing data for companies is available online. Sometimes we see companies being relaxed on filing their EPF on a timely basis. So there are many data points like this which are available, which we have started incorporating in our analysis when we especially look at from an ESG perspective. Some of you would know that SEBI and RBI both are working very actively to bring out ESG ratings in India. While I think Neha pointed out it's going to be a very big challenge when you have 1,000 different ESG frameworks available. People are likely to get confused. What is the right way of measuring companies on that parameter? But I'm sure, I think in the next couple of years, this is another area where we'll start evaluating companies as well.
So many different frameworks out there. And to a large extent, when it comes to the corporate sector, there has been quite a bit of convergence on what to report, how to report. Where do you think does the impact sector lie? Do you think there's a way to converge, and especially the ESG rating that you spoke about, and kind of how can we learn from some of those and use that? I mean, the ESG framework and also the ratings, how can we use that with the impact sector?
So, as I said, we rate companies across the spectrum, small, large, medium, and all that. I see the entire bucket, in two ways. It's like, an analogy of India, where you have tier 1 cities, which are always leading from the front, and then the trends that pan out in tier 1 cities then kind of become an aspiration for tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 markets in India. So that's exactly what is happening in the ESG space as well as corporate India is concerned. The top 300 to 500 companies, mostly the listed ones, for them ESG frameworks are no longer aspirational. They're no longer on the drawing board or the wish list, but they've now started actively putting them in their day-to-day operations and more importantly their future investment plans. Many of them have hired consultants, they have their own teams who can afford it, who are looking at the ESG, and we were listening to many of them like Zomato and all, Unilever. They have dedicated teams who are working on this. But for the rest of the country, and India is a large fragmented market, ESG is still something which is unfortunately not still on the drawing board stage. And as Neha said that you can define what is scope 1 and even scope 2, but till the time you don't get to the scope 3 level, it's going to be really tough to make an impact.
Thank you so much, Shamsher, for that, and thank you to all the discussants here for bringing in your perspectives. I think we do have some time for a couple of questions from the audience. If you have any specific questions for anyone of the speakers, okay. So, can we pass?
Million lives impacted with a few cents or a few Lakpati farmers, which one would you choose? Why? The second question is to Shamsher. I think we're putting up a social stock exchange framework, and generally impact metrics, if you classify into three groups: income, environment and social. At least for the environmental metrics, let's say, we grow fodder in desert, we are able to eliminate drudgery for women. At least on the water impact, if an environmental agency could give a certificate, our conversations with investors would be much easier. Carbon is still okay because you have LCA, LCA is a very strong framework, and you have very good method of reporting the avoidance and all that. But for water, drudgery, soft metrics, there isn't a certifying agency. So how soon can we get that? And for maybe MHRD could be involved in at least giving some guidelines as to who could certify the social impact and the environmental impact. Right. So two questions there. Thank you.
So I think there are three angles to environment, as you said. One is on the sourcing of power and fuel, which I think is becoming very clear in India. And I'll give you a very interesting example. I was talking to a client of ours which has a very large manufacturing footprint in India and in Europe for auto components. And I asked him, what percentage of your power in India comes from renewable sources, directly or indirectly, and the same in Germany. And he said 45% in India and some 15% in Germany. It's a preconceived notion for us many times that the developed markets are way ahead of us. But yeah, they may be ahead of us in many things like buying of EV cars and all of that. But there are many areas where India is also doing a great job. 75% of our now incremental power capacity in the country is renewable. And that's only going to go up in the future. So I think as far as power is concerned, there are reliable sources which are available where you can rely on their data mining and the reporting as well. For water also, I think in certain industries particularly which are very polluting, chemicals, active pharma, ingredient manufacturing and all, again, there are agencies which provide testing, and you can read in the annual reports of many of these large companies. The data is already available. But yes, it is not available for a large section of the corporates in India or the manufacturing companies in India, which is a struggle.
Lakpati lives. Which one would you choose and why?
So from my side, it is also just not lives impacted, but how the lives are impacted, because lives touched is not the metric. We want to go a bit deeper there to see how. So that gives the granularity of how much can we go width-wise and depth-wise. But it's also constrained by the resources that we have. So it goes with where the highest additionality of our investment is. And a Lakpati farmer in a Jharkhand versus 100 smallholder farmers in a 50 kilometers from Mumbai, that would be the discussing point for impact first investors to look at, to say, if you invest in a Jharkhand, the diffusion effect of that investment may go further, and the opportunity for the smallholder farmers from other investors from a Mumbai region may be more to attract, they can use that capital. But for a Jharkhand-based Lakpati farmer also, the opportunities may be limited. So that's the way of reasoning, but it's also case-by-case basis for us. So that's my answer, but I invite any of our panelists to. But thank you so much. We have another question. We just have, sorry, but just last question. I have bell ringing here, but we can take the discussion outside as well.
Sure. Hi, this is Priyatam. I work as a researcher with CEW. So my question is to the entire panel here. As you're all mentioning, I think there are like only a few like technology manufacturers or solution providers in the climate space, and there are like so many funding organizations, investment organizations, and philanthropic organizations in the space. So how do you ensure, even like you're mentioning Shruti and Soumya, like you both support Sahas and like you measure the same indicators. So how do you ensure that the same indicator is not like double counted? How do you make sure within the framework that like there is no duplication of effort in terms of data collection, and then because multiple organizations fund the same solution, and then they collect the same indicators and data and project that they have done this much impact. So how do you make sure that that is not like a duplicate value or a doubly counted value? Second question is that post the collection of data, how do you ensure that this contributes to change, not just internally for strategies, but then for the people who you are working for, like creating these solutions and technologies at the ground level? How do you ensure that it contributes to change? So those are my two questions.
Thanks. Priyank, right?
Priyatam.
Thanks for the question. Anybody wants to take it?
That's how we calibrate our results.
Yeah, I think that's a valid question. The thing is, I think, are we measuring what are we measuring? We're measuring the impact of the company which is making the change, or are we measuring the impact of the person who's financing it? So we are on the later side. So probably what we're all talking about mostly is the impact that particular entity has made. All of us can talk about it. I don't know whether we are actually calibrating it and counting everything at this point in time. Yes, we are all talking about the same numbers, that's for sure. But having said that, on the measurements of what we talked about, I think there needs to be a better frameworks to be coming. I'm sure, I think Shamsher can actually probably throw some light. I think we have this national guidelines on responsible business conduct. I think that also will probably, if most companies starts reporting on that, we will be able to know. But that is, as of now, is not applicable. It's very extensive and exhaustive. I don't know which any of the impact companies will even try to make an attempt to actually comply with that. But having said that, but if your question, why I pointed out to that was, the same thing happens to this national code of guidelines, which is also measured at the national level. What happens then if it is all multiple counted, because at the national level, how it's going to be reported. I don't have an answer for that, but probably I think it is the question to some regulators to actually figure out. But as a common man or people on the street, I think what we should be more interested in, what is that particular company doing, how impactful it is, and how or impactful or not. That's all what we should be looking at.
Can I add to that? So essentially, yeah, just putting on my investor hat. That's an excellent question, Rhythm. What we do additionally, and Suresh is right, it's about what impact the company created, but my role as an investor is to say what additional capital did I catalyze, and specifically private sector capital, because the role of impact investors made that much more robust if you can engage private sector capital into the same world that we're all living in, right? So that's usually the holy grail. So we additionally track not just the company impact, and the lights went off.
Time out.
I was about to say, and the investments catalyzed.
I think you can speak. I think people can hear.
No, I mean that was it. We just we captured the additional capital catalyst. And so in that case, the fact that the two of them have invested is a very strong plus. That they both are impact, but if they want to bring some private capital, that'll be a family office. That'll be amazing.
I don't know whether we are trying to measure what is my share of the impact
Contribution.
in that or not.
Yeah,
I
the
don't-
attribution is tough.
As of now, I think there was an attempt made for that. Is that joint impact model which was done by PII and others. I think probably you can take a look at it. They will say, okay, what is your share of the impact for the investments you have made?
but currently attributing it at our level, at an investor level, is very tough to say my $50,000 gave you these many jobs and their $1 million gave this much reduction in carbon emission. That level of attribution is not there. Just one more point I wanted to add. You brought up an important issue that if both of us are invested in Sahas, and how are we making sure there's no double counting, so I think that's where some of these industry bodies and collaborations are really helping us, because like for Paya, for example, we launched the Dignified Jobs Collaborative. So what we have done is with 6 other investors, we are trying to say that if we can come up with a common metric on quality jobs in our investments, including YSB, with Acumen, and then can we come up with what are those 5 things that we all will ask our portfolio companies, and if we are co-investing or anything, we know what we are tracking. But that's a small initiative we have taken on, say, quality jobs. But on climate, can there be, like what Neha said, can there be those 5 metrics that everybody is asking over years, and then we all kind of start converging on that. That is an area where spade work is, I think, started, but not.
Yeah, I think just to echo what she's been saying, right? The duplication of effort that's really happening there. Because maybe the methodology that someone else uses in terms of reporting on a metric will be slightly different from what Upaya may need on a particular investment versus what a CFO may need. I think that's really where we need to do. So reporting, yes, I think there are ways in which we could try it, but I think it's also on the startup level, especially when capacities are, it's still smaller, it's growing. I think that's really where we need to converge as investors, different types of investors.
Thank you everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for